Well, good evening, folks, and welcome back to the farm. It's a chilly one today, boy oh boy. Coldest day of the season thus far. It was minus 34 degrees here at the farm today, and well, it didn't come without wind either, so made it real pleasant. Anyways, what we're going to touch on today a little bit, not really super weather related, but I mean, it could come into play, it could be a factor. We're going to talk about things that disrupt supply chains, things that can make life awkward, and a little bit of preparedness, survivability topics when it comes to making it through an extended outage or an extended disruption of service, whether that's utilities, food supply chain, you name it. So let's dig into it. But we're going to go in the shop. It's a little bit warmer. Well, it's much nicer here in the shop, inside the tractor, out of the elements. By definite comparison to what it is outside. Anyways, so why are we talking about this today? Why are we talking about, getting by, being prepared? It's not just the fact that it's minus 34 outside, but there's been some recent events that have really got a guy thinking about, how would we outlast, an extended outage of any, type of necessity, right? Like utilities is one that comes to mind. Grocery chains is another one that comes to mind. But there's also a whole bunch of other stuff. We just have to look at, southern BC and the flooding that went hand in hand with, isolation of supply networks because the roads all washed out and people were really stranded without resources, displaced from their homes. No access to groceries because the shelves were bare for either they were bought up what was available or the stuff had to be thrown out because it couldn't be kept. So that was a true scale disaster. Now, the messaging for years when it comes to emergency preparedness has been, keep enough for 72 hours. Keep enough for 72 hours. But we're seeing now with larger scale disruptions to supply chains, more violent, I guess, weather patterns and really extreme weather. We're not just talking about a bad storm here. We're talking about like scorched earth kind of stuff. Like, when you look at it and you're just like disaster on a scale that's unimaginable is happening to some of these communities. Or in what cases is entire regions, entire counties. So it's incomparable to what we've experienced in my lifetime. I'm not going to say it's experienced ever, because obviously there could be a whole argument about cyclical weather patterns and things like that. But definitely in our lifetime, this is about as extreme as certainly I've seen it. So 72 hours isn't going to cut it. So now, what do I really need to prepare for this, once in a lifetime kind of event that's either going to displace me, starve me, freeze me? How am I going to get through this? So I guess I should maybe start off with what even qualifies me to talk about this on this subject. So for those that, maybe don't know the history here, there was a time in another life, perhaps, where I was really close to becoming a world-renowned survival expert and decided to run away and work on the rigs instead. So just pursued a different path, but it's always been a passion of mine. And so here we are today. We're living a little bit of a different lifestyle. We're not entirely, we did spend some time here on the farm. We're off-grid while we're building the farm, and that was a blast. Built a lot of character, learned a lot of stuff that maybe I had an understanding of before, but had never really put into practice, and that gave us that opportunity. But now we're expanding more into, we're definitely taking advantage of the resources that are available to us. We're plugged into the matrix per se. But that does allow us to do a lot more, releases from a lot more things when it comes to being able to grow our own groceries and reduce our reliance on a lot of external things, government being one of those things. Anyways, back to the task at hand. How am I going to prepare for this large-scale disaster that's going to last more than 72 hours? And what's the first thing I probably should really think about keeping around? There's there's actually 12 things that you should probably keep around on, you know, in preparedness for a large scale emergency. And the first one is water. I mean, that's kind of been a given for forever. You know, and historically, again, the 72-hour preparedness has always been, you know, keep a few flats of water around. And a few flats of water around is, you know, it's an okay strategy. It gets you by so you don't get too dehydrated in that 72-hour window. But it doesn't allow you to flush the toilet. It doesn't really provide you with much in the way of cooking. It doesn't allow you anything for bathing. And if you're looking at an extended outage, well, you're going to be in a pickle. So what do you need to do? Well, if you've got land with a water source on it, we have a well. We also have dugouts here. So, okay, well, if the power supply is down, well, the well is screwed. Let's be honest, the well is screwed. That's dead in the water. No pun intended. Dead in the water. But however, the dugouts, right? The dugout. Okay, well, 6 months of the year the dugouts froze over. So what do I need to make that a viable water source in the wintertime? So I need a drill and the ability to recover water from that. But then, okay, now I'm recovering raw water from an open water source that has ducks and muskrats and sheep drink out of it. So I need to be able to filter that water to make it drinkable, right? So I also probably should look at boiling that water. So I'm going to need things to do that. Plus I need a place that once I recover that water and I've treated it in whichever way I deem appropriate, that I'm going to have to store that water in some way. Now that doesn't mean you need to have a cistern in your house or anything like that, but you should be able to have enough clean storage capacity, some big 20-liter jugs or something like that, some clean 5-gallon pails, that you can store, a large quantity of water if you're looking at an extended outage. Now, the second thing that comes to mind is food, right? I mean, 72 hours worth of food. Yeah, I mean, man, oh man, there's a lot of folks that live, I would say, day to day in their groceries, right? There's also a lot of folks that live week to week in their groceries. The average consumer is not, I just can't comprehend what it is to purchase for more than 14 days. I would say the average consumer in their household does not necessarily even have the capacity to be able to store in excess of 14 days supply of food because they're just not set up for it. But, if you're keeping a prepared mindset, this is what you need to do. And it's, 14 days, I would say, would be a minimum. In reality, you should probably be looking at closer to 60 to 90 days, right? Be able to get through an entire season, right? At least get to the next season. And we think of that in terms here in the wintertime, right? I mean, if things went wrong here for whatever reason, and the grocery chain just one day was done, well, I mean, I need 100 days to get to where I can even grow something again, right? Before I can even put something in the ground. So that 90 days or maybe even 100 days is critical for where we are. Now, if you live in more southern climes where you can grow things more frequently or even into the later portion or the earlier portion of the year, maybe that's not such a struggle. But here, talking about fruit and vegetable preservation, meat in the freezer, that kind of thing is 100% top priority, because if things go down here in the wintertime, well, we're going to get hungry real quick. And I mean, there's only so many snow cones you can eat. So now on that aspect, the third thing that you really should be thinking about is, okay, well, I've got all this food, but okay, well, what if we lose power, or what if we lose natural gas? Or, and it's funny because I saw the other day somebody was advertising an OffGrid propane stove, which I thought was, there's two things at play here. There's there's the grid, but then there's also the network. So the grid is typically, you think of the grid being all the gas lines that supply the many, many houses throughout our municipalities and our rural areas. But then there's also a network of, bulk propane haulers that can then deliver to the rural properties. Or in some cases, they are allowed in towns. Some municipalities don't allow propane tanks in town, but all depends on where you live. But if that network gets interrupted, and you don't have propane, or if the driver gets sick and he's off for a week. I mean, the old Omicron might get him, and he might be down for 14 days, and then there you are, and it's 40 below, and you've got no propane. Well, how are you going to cook? So having some off-grid cooking capability is pretty important. And in terms of reducing your reliance on a hydrocarbon-based cooking option, or an electrical, hydro-based option. So learn how to gather your own firewood, learn how to cook on it on an open fire, or if you got a wood stove. Wood stove checks a lot of boxes, right? You can heat your home, you can cook your food, you can do all kinds of stuff with it, right? And so that's one really, really good option. But if you are looking at cooking on the open fire kind of option, well, I mean, you need to learn how to actually cook on an open fire, because, well, let's be honest. Have you ever been camping for more than a weekend? You get sick of hot dogs real quick, right? So that's not something that you want to fool around with. If it's going to be plan B, then you should know actually how to properly cook on an open fire, so that the food supply that's so precious to you in these times isn't just ruined by your terrible culinary skills. Anyways, as I was mentioning, yes, the wood stove is critical in terms of indoor heat, right? A lot of people make a critical mistake in relying on things like propane heat for emergency heat. Now, there are certain propane heaters that are okay to use indoors, but there's a huge amount of them that will just puke out a whole bunch of carbon monoxide, and then you'll wake up dead in the morning, essentially. So that's not your best option. So again, being able to gather, secure, chop, store your own firewood, have a wood stove. It's one thing I will admit, we don't have a wood stove in the house. I wish, and I truly regret this. When we built our house, we had to have an honest conversation about what the cost of insurance was going to be. And at the time, we were really stretched kind of thin building the house and buying the land and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I mean, there's only so much depth to your pockets. But if you're looking to make a big investment in terms of preparedness and resilience in your homestead, we'd strongly recommend a good wood stove, because it supplies you with the ability to heat your home, cook your food. It's fantastic, right? Now, the other thing you're going to have to consider, and I mean, it's a big thing for us here, because 6 months of the year, it's wintertime, or in proximity to wintertime, like second and third winter, fourth winter, fifth winter. Which winter are we on right now? Anyways, it's dark. It's perpetually dark here during the winter months. And so if things are disrupted during the summer, then whatever, who cares? It's warm out, it's light till midnight. We're living the dream. It's just like going on an extended camping trip. But if this happens any time after September, between September and let's just say the end of May, maybe beginning of June, we could be in a pickle. So then, well, how am I going to manage this lighting wise? So, well, candles is one thing. If you're talking indoor, candles might be an option. However, outdoors, I mean, that's really limited in terms of success. Batteries is one thing you should definitely be keeping, and we'll talk about batteries in a second here. But, for what we do for chores is probably a really good option. We've got some battery operated portable personal lights, some headbands, flashlights, things like that are, throw a really effective beam of light. I mean, the technology in flashlights in the last even 5 years has just escalated beyond what we'd ever thought it could possibly be, right? LED technology is amazing. So low power demand, huge light output. But not only personal lighting, you should also have some work lighting, especially if you have to set up, indoors. If you have a power outage, you have to be able to see things and reset fuses and turn generators on, and maybe get food pulled out of freezers or whatever you need to do, and you need a light to do it. You're going to want to have a really good work light plus some really good personal lights. Now, batteries, as I alluded to, is also super critical in terms of that. You can go to the dollar store and buy, some pretty junky batteries, let's be honest, right? Stick with the Energizer, the Everready, the Duracells. I mean, honestly, you do really get what you pay for in terms of that. If you have access to some good name brand rechargeable batteries that you can keep on a power pack on the wall, constantly plugged in, ready to go, that might also be another viable option. Same with any kind of power tools. If you gotta go cordless power tools, right? Let's be honest, corded power tools, I mean, they're a goddamn boat anchor when you've got no power. They're no good to you, right? And if we're talking about generators here in a bit, I mean, they're really limited on how much you can run on your generator typically. And now if you're starting to have to use demand on power tools and stuff, it can take away from other things that are maybe critical, right? So a good set of cordless power tools with a good strong set of batteries is a high necessity. So backup power, we've got 2 generators here at the farm. We have not yet put in a transfer switch. That's next summer's project. Once we build the barn, and I've got to do a tie-in on the pole anyways, I want to get a transfer switch put in there so that I can actually wheel the generator out, plug it in, flip the switch, and then we're back in business. What you have to be cognizant of there is what's your power demand, and what's your day-to-day power demand. But then when it hits the fan, what's your power demand necessity? Not just what's your day-to-day, well, I can just turn the lights on whenever I want kind of thing. What's the critical infrastructure you need to keep running? So we already talked about food, so I'm guessing you've probably got a freezer, maybe a couple, that got to stay running. Probably a fridge to go with it. Well, that's pretty high power demand, right? So is my home set up with LED lighting, right, as opposed to incandescent lighting, right? Huge change in power demand there. So there's some stuff you can do. There's actually well, I don't know if they're still available, but some jurisdictions do have grants available for green housing, electrical energy projects, like things like switching over to LED bulbs, which may be an option. Puts a lot less stress on your backup generator when you need it. But okay, so I got the freezers. Maybe my cook stove is electric, so that's going to be intermittent usage. Some peak usage there. If I have a forced air furnace, that's totally running on power. And as I said, any kind of indoor lighting that you need, right? Keep in mind, here we're running a farm, so we're keeping power plugged in the waters to keep that all from freezing. That also supplies power to our water well for the pump and the VFD and all that whole system. So there's a lot of critical infrastructure that has probably more of a power demand than maybe you think. And so when you actually start adding all this stuff up, and then you look at, how big of a generator do I really need? And suddenly you realize, the 1500 watt Honda that you got, it's gonna get you by if you're just keeping the freezers plugged in for a few hours. But I mean, if you had to go 72 hours, man, are you ever stretching that? Now, if you had to go 14 days, you're really having to think about, what am I unplugging at this point in time, right? And if you're looking at months, well, then you're probably going to hour out that generator and then not be able to get parts for it, and then, because it's going to be overworked and it's just going to be a gong show. So if you're looking to buy a generator, always buy bigger than what you think you need. It's better to have too much and not need it than not have enough and be sitting there, extension cord in hand, deciding, is it going to be the fridge or the freezer? What am I going to let go here? So I guess hand in hand with the generator, one thing, and it's not really part of this, but it's on the periphery, and it's something that you should definitely keep in your pocket. And I talked a little bit earlier about propane, and our dependence on hydrocarbons and how that can really, be limited. And we've seen that definitely in the past when it comes to large scale disasters, is that the gas stations are done. Like, you're not getting what you think you're getting. The lineups might be 10 miles long, and by the time you make it there, you're getting the last couple drips, and you're just not getting what you need, right? So having an adequate supply of diesel, gas, whatever it might be, is important. Recommend, if you're going to be storing gas or diesel, make sure you're able to rotate through it, or keep it stabilized so that when you know, if it's sat here for 6 months, then you try and put it in your generator and it's, you know, it's just, yeah, it's not working for you, right? Your generator's running like crap, you're getting power surges, you know, you're fouling spark plugs. That's just going to compound a problem that you already have. So make sure you got either fresh gas and sufficient to get you through for a while, or an adequate supply of stabilized fuel. Anyways, that's on the periphery, like I said. The next thing you want to consider is the toilet. You know what? Last year there was a whole bunch of people that were called, you know, selfish and crazy and everything, and the end of the world is really coming. Your tushy's gonna thank you if you've got an adequate supply of toilet paper to get through some stuff. So, you know, do you need to have a 4-year supply of it? No. Should you have enough for a couple of months? Probably that's reasonable, right? A couple months supply, you know, 2 big Costco packs. It's probably all you need to get through it. And in the interim, if you need to barter that for some bread and some cheese or whatever, that might be an option for you. But anyways, yeah, there's thing, if you're able to eat, there's other biological functions that are going to have to happen. And if that's the only joy you have left in the world, well, wiping your behind with twigs and berries is gonna take your passion out real quick. So another thing you're gonna need is, well, I mean, buy the best first aid kit that you can possibly afford, right? So here in Alberta, it's all numbered, right? 1, 2, 3. You're gonna want to buy the biggest one you can possibly get with the most amount of supplies, and you know, keep things like basic medications on hand, right? Disinfectants. I don't know if you can get your hand on any antibiotics. It's not something typically you can get without a prescription. But any type of, you know, on-the-shelf kind of medications you can get, that you have access to, that are you know, routinely needed, keep a little bit more of that stuff around. Definitely. And I mean, if it really hits the fan and, you know, there's snakes or there's spiders or wolves or what, you know what, who knows how bad things could get, right? But what we have to look at right now, and especially this is happening with our healthcare system daily, is the healthcare system is just, you know, imploding on itself. For as much as our politicians try to, you know, blind the rest of the world and think, oh no, things are, you know, we're making do, despite the fact that we're firing nurses and we were understaffed to begin with. And yeah, anyways, that's maybe a story for another day, but you see what I mean, is the healthcare system is already crumbling and things aren't even that bad. So when things get really, really bad, I'm at least going to want to have to be able to patch myself up a little bit if needs be. Now, next on the list is communication. So, you know, lots of folks are living in the cellular age now. I mean, there's not too many folks that have a landline around. There's still lots out there, but in terms of gross numbers, you know, I think the larger portion of the population has switched entirely cellular. And we've seen a few events here in the last couple of years where just for no real reason whatsoever, you don't know why, all of a sudden you've got service, and then now you're in a black hole. You can't phone 911, you can't phone Tom Cruise, you can't phone Oprah Winfrey, you can't phone the Jewish God. Like, you're dead in the water. You're done. You're living in the dark ages. And that's really what scares me about the whole digital age that we live in right now, is that, you know, the wrong guy at Facebook hits a button, and I mean, nobody's gonna know, right? Nobody's gonna know what's happening in the world, because this is going to be complete darkness. So having a secondary means of communication, even if it's one-way communication, even if it's, you know, access to a wind-up radio, so you can at least, you know, get some understanding of what's happening around you. But if you're talking like, you know, what's to keep in a set of bug-out bags or things like that, some really good rechargeable UHF VHF radios would be an asset. And again, you know, if you've got a way to charge those off-grid is probably more beneficial, because at that point in time, your access to a wall outlet is probably really limited. Now the last thing is, I would think personally, to me, it is the most important, because I think if you're at this last point, you've probably already thought about all of the other stuff that we've just talked about. But this is secondary shelter. So you've got your primary residence. For some reason, your primary residence is impacted. Maybe it's flooded, maybe it's caught on fire, maybe the military showed up and just taken over your home, and you've got to get some shelter somehow, right? You've got to get out of the elements, you've got to survive. So having something that's away from your primary residence, preferably mobile. So in terms of like an RV or a tent or a tiny home on wheels, portable cabin, something like that you can pick up, go to where you need to, and then reset up, or is maybe already at some other location that's secure with the supplies that you need to get on. So maybe you've got a generator there, maybe you got a water supply there, you got a food cache there. But that secondary residence or secondary shelter is huge in a disaster type event, regardless of the context of it. I mean, we just saw what happened in southern BC. Literally tens of thousands of people displaced. Absolutely terrible, right? So being able to pick up and not have to sleep on the floor of the gym somewhere can be save you a lot of stress. Anyways, I don't know if you can hear that, but the heater just kicked on in the shop, so it's definitely still cold outside. So I better get my evening chores done here, get the sheep some more hay, get the horses some grain, run over and check on our lambs. I better check on that water over there too to make sure it's not froze up. And then it'll be time for me to go in, get myself a cup of tea, and see if I can't find myself a little snack before bed. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please go down below, hit like, hit subscribe, invite your friends, share the video, leave a comment in the comments section. That would be fantastic. One thing we did put out on our YouTube channel in the community tab was actually a survey question here today, gauging feedback. Get some feedback on what do you think is your level of preparedness if we were to come across, a large-scale disaster type event that were to interrupt food and fuel and all these other types of supply networks that we depend on so frequently. So if you want to go and check that out, maybe leave us an answer there, that would be awesome too. But for now, I will let you go. I hope you have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.